Good evening from Lagos, Nigeria. Good to see you again, and thank you for joining us. How can we better accelerate strategies towards poverty reduction? That's the question today. An urgent one too, if you consider that around 460 million people on the continent are living below the poverty line of $1.90 a day in 2022. This figure implies that of approximately 1.4 billion inhabitants, roughly a third of Africa's population live in extreme poverty. More recently, the COVID-19 pandemic significantly increased the number of the newly poor and has been described as the worst reversal on the path towards the goal of global poverty reduction in the last 3 decades. Although the levels of poverty are forecast to decrease in the coming years, Africa would remain the poorest region compared to the rest of the world if urgent actions are not taken. Today, in commemoration of International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, we will be exploring how best to accelerate strategies aimed at poverty reduction. My guest is the manager, Food and Agriculture Program, ActionAid Nigeria, Azubike Nwokoye. He is a development expert with over 15 years national and international experience in campaigning, campaign coordination, campaigns, coalition and alliance building with specialized training on agriculture and social sciences. He is a professional in agriculture budget analysis. He trains organizations, citizens groups on agriculture budget monitoring and advocacy. Azubike is also an expert in policy analysis, project management, and gender justice in value chain development. I want to say a very big thank you for joining us and giving us your time today, Mr. Nwokoye.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Let's begin with the viability of the data on the level of poverty. When it comes to Africa, there are some who say figures presented reveal almost nothing at all about the reality of poverty in Africa. Do you believe, I guess that's where I'm going, in the accuracy of available data that says by 2030, global poverty will become increasingly African? Do you trust current data on poverty levels in Africa?
Okay, so like I was saying, I said that we actually recognize the fact that the current data is quite conservative, sense that there are different levels of poverty also.
Okay, well, you've explained that a bit. So you're basically saying the data might be underreporting the level of poverty in Africa, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if we don't seem to trust the data, it just gives us an idea of what the level of poverty is. Do we, as Africans, have maybe testing lab, a hypothesis testing lab, or any effort at collecting our independent data to help us in the process of trying to reduce poverty?
Yes, we are collecting our own data, and most times our data is not usually they are not usually far away from what the other global bodies like World Bank and others are also saying. Because like if World Bank is collecting in Nigeria, they collect it in collaboration with the MDS, the Bureau for Statistics in Nigeria. So we collect our own data, and it is also clear that we need to in Africa.
Okay, so, but what is the place, I think that should come from you. What is the place of data analysis when we are trying in poverty reduction efforts, in trying to look at how we can accelerate the strategies that we have? How important is it that we have proper data?
It's very important that we have proper data to help us in planning, because if you're planning for planning, then you're planning wrongly. Also, the missing link across Africa around this type of issues and about the collection of the data, most governments do not go back to discuss with people living in poverty that they are designing interventions for to do. They don't assessment in order to prioritize what will work for them also. So most times, if you don't discuss with the people and plan with them, for instance, put a borehole where borehole is not needed. You can decide to give to a community where they don't even plant rice. So where are the people on the table in terms of planning interventions for them also? And also, when you allow you, give you up to a level of accurate idea in terms. So you need to really take that into cognizance.
Okay, contextualizing strategies, so it's actually relevant. That is key, and that will be, helped along with data. Let's move a little further. There is some growth in Africa. Economically, there is some growth. But it seems poverty defies those growth. Why is it that the level of poverty in Africa stays stubbornly high despite the growth that we see?
Now, that has the level of low development countries, and also what are the kind of interventions that are being done to reduce poverty. Conditional cash transfers will not work. Might be for people in poverty. There is at that moment they can eat, but transfers are not enough to start up businesses. That means they won't be generating income. So whatever we are doing around poverty reduction has to come with supporting enterprises, small and medium enterprises, supporting productivity, supporting income generation, also providing access to cheap credit and so on. So they have to all work together. So most times, to think about what kind of interventions we want to do to reduce poverty. We don't also contextualize different interventions, because in terms of context, for instance, you can implement some program in Nigeria and you quickly you are able to pull out even millions out of poverty. But if you implement or in Togo, you might not get results. So it has to be contextualized. Then investments need to be properly targeted. That's why it's important to do a proper needs assessment. We need to do a lot of rural appraisals to also discuss with the people what the issues are. And the kind of interventions that we need to do needs to also be empowering. It has to take the approach of human rights-based approach. So the right holders should be put first. That's the way we can reduce poverty.
Okay, let's talk about one other factor. For a lot of us, it is a strength, but experts are saying it might not be, because it is affecting poverty reduction efforts. I'm talking about our population. There seems to be an increasing fertility rate in Africa, and experts are saying we need to check this. Is Africa's population a plus for our poverty reduction effort, or it is something that needs to be checked if we are to really reach the people that require help?
Now, everything that has advantages has disadvantages. And also, it depends on what are we harnessing. Now, population is a blessing if it is harnessed positively. I mean, even the level of market and businesses that run in bigger populations don't take place in smaller populations, for example. So, yes, there is need for birth control, especially family planning for, I mean, people should be able to have the number of children they are able to cater for based on their financial capacity also. So all these are intertwined with the kind of interventions government is also doing. Is government also doing enough to bring about the behavioral change that people need to also reduce the number of children they are having? And also, yes, population is also at an advantage, and that is why Nigeria prides itself as the largest market in Africa, the biggest economy in Africa, and so on and so forth. So we shouldn't shy away from the fact that, yes, large population is an advantage also, but when you want to pull people out of poverty, you need to be decisive. You need to take some measures, and the measures need to be strategic, and the people have to be part of that process. It has to be a win-win situation. It's just like when you see at times people are struggling and maybe they have set up small kiosks in an unapproved area, you know, and the government control just comes and demolishes it. You know, it means that it has driven the people further into poverty. So those are the little contexts that we must take into account when we are doing intervention. And the truth about poverty in Africa is that generally our governments have not really sat down to reflect what kind of programs can they do. You know, our government's approaches have been tokenistic and more of lacking real political will. At times, for some of us in Africa, we see it that even the political class, especially the elites, they want people to remain poor so that they can always have their way, whether in elections or anywhere.
Okay, you just answered the follow-up question I had for you, and that's those who argue that our population is, whether explosion or not, it's not actually the problem, but leadership is a vital part of any progress with poverty reduction efforts. So what would be some of the, we know leadership is one, a population to a certain degree, but what are some of the major challenges to alleviating poverty in Africa in your experience?
Okay, one is having a proper needs assessment of what needs to be done. Lack of putting the right holders, the citizens, at the forefront. You know, in decision making, are citizens part of those decisions? Are you designing with them? Are you supporting them to take ownership of interventions? Are you ensuring that when they take ownership of those interventions, that by the time you finish your intervention, that they are going to sustain it? So they are all encompassing in terms of approach. So the human rights-based approach needs to be integrated into whatever we do. For instance, in African countries, depending on at which stage, there are still many parts of the government process that they do not consult citizens when they are preparing the budgets. So the civil servant just sits and plan for citizens without citizens' input. We cannot continue that way and expect people to come out of poverty also. And also there should be a kind of prioritization in how we do this. Now, what is also happening is that there's also capture of access to resources by those who have the opportunity to, So it's just like where some people are doing intervention. Let me just give this an example. Some years ago, we were doing flood intervention in an IDP camp, and the staff of one of the IDP, emergency agency, they were insisting that their names needs to be on the list so that they can receive both cash and non-cash items we are providing for people that were displaced and are suffering pain. So what usually happens at times is that elite capture is also part of that, or people who have access also capture that. So, but it also has to do with what is the orientation of this society? What leadership are we showing? Because everything has to start with different approaches. What is our culture as a people? So all those things needs to be put into account. So it is actually our context, and we need to do more to hold our policymakers and people in government accountable.
Okay, let me, you highlighted a number of things: leadership, population, needs assessment, involvement of citizens, human rights, elite capture. Of these, which would you say the order of priority for attention? How will they come?
Okay, I would say I will bring a language which is very important, which when we talk about, we don't actually go we don't go all the way. It's about political will and commitment. What has happened is that if a government is quite decisive, a government will implement, will make sure that they design programs with the people and make sure that they implement it to the latter, and ensure that, they support people to come out of poverty. And I don't know, at times, some of us wonder where we are missing it, because if you have a flourishing population, then you are also able to generate a lot of revenue. And that will also help you in terms of whether you're building infrastructure and so on. And it will also help you as a country to reduce your external borrowing. So it is actually about political will and commitment, foremost, in terms of making sure that you are designing with the people and working with the people to take ownership of processes and programs and ensure that people are brought out of poverty. Okay. This year, International Day for Poverty Eradication, the theme is about dignity. Due to poverty, citizens across Africa have lost their personal. The truth is that poverty is man-made. Poverty is not, it is man-made. And if we don't put the right structures and systems,
I think you captured in your opinion, the most important, and that is political will. Once we have good leadership and the political will, everything basically falls into place. Let's take a short break. On the flip side of it, we will continue looking at existing strategies, implementation, challenges, and the growth potential for us. Stay with us. Good to see you again. I still have Mr. Azubike Nwokoye with us, and I want to take this conversation to the initiatives that already exist. A number of that have been adopted over time. Ghana, for instance, a poverty reduction strategy. Ethiopia has sustainable development and poverty reduction program. Kenya's economic recovery strategy for wealth and employment creation. And then you have Senegal. They also have a poverty reduction strategy. Uganda as well, some other countries. Analysts say the measures outlined in some of these policy documents have not been effective in reducing poverty because they were initiated as a condition for development assistance under the debt relief initiative of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Mr. Nwokoye, is this assertion correct, or what is your view on this?
Okay, depending on the context, it could be yes, it could be no. Yes and no, in the fact that in terms of yes, except those in terms of the kind of conditional cash and maybe loans, what did the government collect it to do? Also, so yes and no. In the part of no, also, the question is for what the government has designed, because we have good documents, policies, strategies across Africa, but they are not funded properly across board. So the thing is this, it is not a foreign government that will come and reduce poverty in your country. You have to do things by yourself. So, and at times, the funny part is that African countries borrow when they don't even need to borrow, you know, and at times, these monies that are even borrowed end up in few people's pockets at the end of the day. I mean, they use it to enrich themselves. So it could be yes and no, depending on context.
Okay.
Borrowing is good when it is properly invested and is able to support activities.
I think the grouse here is the fact that these banks sort of spell out the mechanisms that these governments should use. If I understand some of the arguments that was put forward, that for that reason, you from the beginning you've been talking about contextualizing, making sure that the people are carried along. So if these banks require certain behavior before these monies can be given, these governments might tend to make policies that suit them. But let's move on. Strategies, what are some that are being implemented that you are aware of that is working? You could be country specific so we can better understand.
Okay. There are strategies around entrepreneurship, supporting young people. They are implemented in small, at the small scale level, sort of, you know. I mean, there are different strategies that are working, like for vocational skills. If you support young people and you also support them with startup and also provide mentoring for some time. As ActionAid, we have done a lot of interventions across Nigeria and even our sister organizations in other parts of Africa have also done a lot of interventions that are working. We actually do a lot of service modeling to demonstrate to government that it can be done with even lesser resources. So we've had a situation whereby we had worked with a community somewhere in Nigeria here to provide them with a cassava processing facility, and the government was shocked at the amount that we ended up spending, and the business is up and running, and the people are enjoying the benefits, and they are maintaining it on their own because they own it as a cooperative. So strategies are actually working. There are a lot of strategies. You can handhold people, and the truth is this, I mean, when we say knowledge-based economy, at times it does not mean that the people that everybody has to go to a university or become a doctor or a professor. When we talk about knowledge-based could be as a result of training in certain skills, so there are different strategies that are working. Even within government interventions in Africa, there are also other strategies that they are implementing that are working. The various strategy documents on poverty reduction you have mentioned across African countries, Ghana, Senegal, and Ethiopia, and so on. There are components within them that is working. But what needs to be done properly is for governments to reflect those that are working. When you look closely, you find out that they are working because government is quite committed to it. Government is financing it properly.
Which of them comes to mind, Mr. Nwokoye? Which of some of these strategies or initiatives that you think is actually working? Maybe in Nigeria, maybe in another place that you've worked in with ActionAid.
So I am actually making references based on my experience of different programs and strategies. It's just like when the Nigerian government implemented UWIN, it actually supported some people to start up their business also. Within some interventions of government, some projects in Nigeria here, like under the IFAD Value Chain Development Program in partnership with the federal government, farmers are also succeeding through the training, support, and provision of processing facilities. So there are different programs that are actually working. What we need is to concentrate on those programs that are working, do a scale up, and ensure sustainability. And how can we replicate? So like what I was saying is that programs are going to work if the right steps are taken in designing and implementation. What you also find out where it is not working is that also maybe the funding is not also released on time, or the process is not also transparent.
Okay. One of the strategies that I saw in the course of prepping for this conversation is the education, the importance of the education of girls and women and empowering them with skills, like you said, not necessarily going to school. I want you to speak on that. How important is the connection between women's education and poverty reduction efforts?
Yeah, it has a strong connection. And when we talk about education, education might be the basic of reading and writing and some level of financial literacy, then access to credit and other support, trainings and other support, and they are in business and doing well. So actually, in terms of empowering women and young girls is actually a quick way to reduce poverty, because the women and young girls are actually the major face of poverty in Nigeria. So it is as simple as that, but we need to concentrate efforts. There are programs that are working. There are programs that as ActionAid we have also done. The cassava processing facility, I give an example, was supported for a particular set of women in a community in Kogi State. We've had different projects, including in Delta, where we also supported a processing facility. So we do. So we also have what we call the women peer education, where we support women to be able to engage on their own issues and support each other also. And then we have been successful around that. So it's a matter of providing the right support, reducing early child marriages, reducing gender-based violence, and also supporting women to have voice. Women having voices alone could actually be a way out of poverty, an easy way out of poverty, because it means that their issues, they can represent themselves on their issues, they can actually push their issues adequately. So we do all that. And just to say that when you look at the number of out of school children in Nigeria, you could see that that number is growing, and the number is not growing in Nigeria alone, it's also growing across Africa. People living in slum is also growing. You could see the pictures you're showing, the video you're showing. So it means that we need to do a lot of work as Africans. So we need to actually stand out as Africans for Africans to ensure that people come out of poverty. While we were quite young, even in Nigeria, you could see that other foreign nationals were coming to university in Nigeria, but that is no longer happening. We are the ones who are going out now, and that is also contributing to our foreign exchange earnings reducing also.
Yeah.
And impacting to our naira to dollar exchange and so on.
Okay, you spoke quite extensively on encouraging and increasing agricultural productivity. I would have wanted us to explore that a little further, but in the interest of time, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the cash transfer. Let's be clear. Do you agree that it is a way to go towards improving reduction of poverty? If yes, how do we make sure it really gets to the poor people that needs it? You know what happened in Nigeria. There were controversies all over the place about the money not getting to those who need it.
Yes, the money not getting to those who need it, but it actually to some level also got to some who needed it. But what I'm actually saying is that we need to do what is sustainable. So I would rather suggest that if you're going to do cash transfer, you should design it with the people. You should do your enumeration and assessment to make sure that you're giving to the poorest of the poor. And if you're giving to the poorest of the poor, you shouldn't program in such a way that you're giving handouts. You should program in such a way that you are supporting livelihood startup, and that can be sustainable. So it is better you provide some level of training for a livelihood and support that livelihood business to start up than the fact that you're doing a conditional cash transfer every month. So it becomes handout. Every month you have to give the person before the person will eat. It doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable. It has to be, and for based on what we know, that is not, it can be a human rights based approach. You can only do such intervention maybe for people that are displaced, so that they can have food to eat at that immediate, but you need to also think about supporting them to be able to get back on their feet and restore their livelihood. So, one, proper needs assessment needs to be done. Two, proper targeting needs to be done. And three, elimination of leakages within that needs to be done. Because we have seen in a situation whereby a government program people in government ends up putting their family and friends as beneficiaries, and it means that at the end of the day, people that need those support will not get it. So those are part of the leakage. So it has to be done right. It has to be sincere. The political will and commitment has to be there. There should be consequences for those who divert such programs also. So there should be transparency and accountability within the process. The people themselves need to sit on the table. What we do in communities is that we work with the people from the onset to identify needs and also come to a proper understanding, and also ensure that we eliminate whatever is going to cause leakage. So government should take the approach of using a human rights-based approach for interventions.
Okay. Let's touch on conflict and violence. I mean, it is a strong driver for displacement and increases poverty. The number of coups in the last few years is quite frankly an irritant to efforts. Much of the efforts would be wasted with continuing conflict. My question would be, what can we do despite this reality? Because it seems we're not getting away from it. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had another coup. That's on one side. You have the Tigray crisis. We have other conflicts across the continent. In spite of this, what can we do to keep making efforts to reduce poverty?
Now, conflict has its drivers. So at times, conflict could be driven by some people feeling that they are marginalized, or it could also be driven by people who want to also take power by force for themselves and only for themselves also. So conflict is also multidimensional. But within the conflict we have, government needs to ensure that the economy is running, and government needs to focus a lot around conflict resolution. There are early warning signs at times before conflict breaks out, and those that are experts in that area normally ensures that interventions start taking place before the conflict breaks out. So within the conflicts in Africa, it is important that both sides at war need to reflect, except for the extremists who are not interested in conflict resolution. But governments needs to strategically be able to support people. We need to do a lot of investment around security, but we need to also focus a lot on conflict resolutions. We need to improve our early warnings.
Okay. In the interest of time, I want to get your thoughts quickly. Sorry for interrupting. Before we go, what would be your message to world leaders on the commemoration of International Day for the Eradication of Poverty? If you can make that in 40 seconds, that would be great.
World leaders, it is important that we support fellow citizens to come out of poverty, because they need to live a life of dignity. We should take human rights-based approach to poverty eradication, work with communities, citizens, put the right, they are part of every decision, that they advise on decisions and also guide us, because the truth is that he who wears the shoe knows where he pinches, so that we don't program around poverty eradication or poverty reduction without the leadership of people living in poverty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Azubike Nwokoye, for speaking with us today and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Is poverty in Africa? The answer is obviously yes, there is. However, not everybody in Africa is poor, and Africa is not the poorest continent on earth. Asia is. The question to keep on the front burner is, Why is Africa poor? When we answer that, it becomes obvious what steps needs to be taken. Might I add that in all of this, my guest had said, improving the quality of governance, of government, of leadership is not only important to accelerating poverty reduction, it's also a development goal in itself. And we cannot relent in efforts to get it right. Conversations will continue. That's it for today. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.